Hi children, in this video I will be dealing with the mechanism of hormone functions as well as the classification of hormones into 4 categories based on the chemical nature. This is the pullout from your textbook and I am completing it. What here is indicative is the plasma membrane, and again I am going to complete what is incomplete in the text, that is the nuclear membrane. So in this topic we are going to deal with hormonal action. Hormones produces their effect on the target cell by binding with specialized proteins, and these specialized proteins are called receptors. And these receptors are located either on the membrane, that is the cell membrane, or inside the cell. Specifically inside the nucleus. When it is present, when the receptors are present on the cell membrane, they are called membrane bound receptors. Whereas if they are present inside the cell, inside the nucleus, they are called intracellular receptors or nuclear receptors. So once again, the hormones bring out their effect or produce their effect on the target cell by binding with specialized proteins. These proteins are called receptors. These receptors are either located on the membrane of the target cell or inside the target cell. If they are present on the membrane of the target cell, they are called membrane bound receptors, or if they are present inside the target cell, they are called intracellular receptors or nuclear receptors. And one more property of receptors is that they are hormone specific. Each receptor is specific to a particular hormone, like the lock and key. So now this is a pullout of your textbook and I completed it to show the cell membrane as well as the nuclear membrane. Now we can see on the cell membrane there are a number of receptors. I am going to indicate in blue color here, and there are some receptors. So these receptors are called membrane bound receptors. And the membrane bound receptors, they are hormone specific. So I am going to draw some hormones outside. To show that specificity, I am showing structures with sockets so that it can correctly fit into the receptor. So that type of diagram I am drawing. So you can see one with very small socket, one with broad shallow socket, then here medium and different. So we are going to see that I am going to explain the property of specificity. Look at this. I am bringing it here. See, correctly it fits in. Yes. Look at this. I am going to put it, no, it does not fit in here. So this is not the receptor for this hormone. It has to go for the one which is small. Let this be here. Then let this bind with this. Yes, correctly fits. Then this is having a very broader cup like structure. No, it does not fit in here, does not fit in here. So that should be very specific. So I have to go for the bigger size receptors. So this does not get in because, or this does not bind because it does not have specific receptor. So that point of receptor I explained by this action. Okay. So receptor hormone specific means each receptor are specific to each hormone, not that all the receptors are connected or bound with the hormones. The hormones come and correctly binds to the receptor which is correctly specific to it. Clear? Now this hormone, whether it's membrane bound, it's going to bind with the membrane bound receptors, or it's going into the cell and binds with the intracellular receptors. The hormones bind to the receptors to form a complex, and the name of the complex, hormone receptor complex. And when this complex is formed, what happens? Biochemical changes occur in the cell, and these biochemical changes in the cell results in cellular metabolism. And therefore, the physiological functions of the cells are regulated. So remember this flow chart. The hormone, whether it is going to bind with the receptor on the membrane or the receptor inside the cell, whatever it is, it binds with the receptor. And what is that complex called? Hormone receptor complex. And when the hormone receptor complex is formed, what happens immediately? Biochemical changes occur in the cell, which involves or results in cellular metabolism, and hence the physiology of the cell is regulated. Now, we are going to see how this hormonal action is taking place. So, for that we have to learn the 4 categories of hormones. There's some hormones which bind to the receptors on the membrane, and some hormones will bind to the receptors inside the cell. So, the receptors on the membrane is indicated here with blue. So, there are some hormones that binds to these receptors which are on the membrane bound receptors, and some hormones will bind to the receptors within the nucleus. See, this is the nucleus, I am redrawing the nucleus, and this is the receptor. Okay, so some hormones will get in through the cell membrane and nuclear membrane and gets into the nucleus and binds to its specific receptor. There also specificity is important. Clear? So now we are going to see the action of hormones with the help of a small video clipping. So before going into that, we have to learn the 4 categories of hormones and to which receptors they bind. Whether they bind to the membrane bound receptors or whether they bind to the nuclear receptors or intracellular receptors. There are 4 categories of hormones. The first category of hormones are peptide, polypeptide and protein hormones. Examples are insulin, glucagon, pituitary hormones and the hypothalamic hormones. And remember, these hormones bind to the membrane bound receptors. Second category are the steroids. It includes cortisol, estrogens, progesterone, estradiols and testosterone. The third category includes the iodothioronins. They are the thyroid hormones. And the fourth category of hormones are the amino acid derivatives, example epinephrine. Of these, the first and fourth binds to the membrane bound receptors. So, the first category and fourth category binds to the membrane bound receptors, and this binding of the hormone with the receptor generates a second messenger. The second messenger can be cyclic AMP, IP3 or calcium, which results in biochemical responses, and hence the physiological functions of the cell is regulated. Now we have the intracellular receptors penetrated through the cell membrane, got in through the nuclear membrane and bind with the receptor inside the nucleus. Now what is formed is the hormone receptor complex. And now this hormone receptor complex will bind to the genome. Here the genome is DNA. And when it binds to the genome of the DNA, it results in regulating gene expression and chromosome function. So you saw the mode of action of the 2 categories, the first and the fourth category of hormones. The first category is the peptide, protein, polypeptide hormones, and the fourth category is the amino acid derivatives. These 2 categories of hormones bind to the membrane bound receptors. The second and the third category of hormones, the second category includes the steroids, and the third category included the iodothioronins. They bind to the intracellular receptors or the nuclear receptors. That's all. I hope you have understood hormonal action. Thank you.